My daughter-in-law publicly mocked my food, leaving me humiliated. I felt useless, my heart aching from her cruel words. The shame was unbearable. Those words, uttered with a condescending smile, echoed in my mind like a discordant bell. It was Thanksgiving Day, the holiday I had always loved, and the dinner table at my daughter-in-law Tiffany's house in an upscale Connecticut suburb should have been a place of togetherness and gratitude. Instead, it became the stage for my deepest humiliation. I, Eleanor Vance, a 62-year-old woman who had dedicated her life to nurturing her family with love and good food, stood there, shrunken, feeling the weight of stares and whispers. My pumpkin pie, a family recipe passed down through generations, sat untouched in the center of the table, a monument to my failure. Tiffany, with her perfectly styled blonde hair and designer dress, had made sure everyone knew my dish was, in her words, a relic from a time when palates weren't so refined. With every muffled laugh, every pitying glance, I felt a piece of my soul shatter. The kitchen, my sanctuary, the place where I always felt most alive and useful, had become the epicenter of my pain. If you've ever felt the pain of being underestimated or humiliated, hit like and subscribe to the channel for more stories of overcoming adversity. This wasn't just about cooking. It was an attack on my identity, my history, everything I stood for. That day, the smell of roasted turkey and autumn spices was replaced by the bitter taste of shame. I always believed that food was a universal language of love. As long as I can remember, the kitchen was the heart of our home, a place where memories were made and bonds were strengthened. My son Michael grew up with the smell of fresh bread and homemade stews, and I was proud of every meal I prepared. Cooking wasn't just a chore. It was a passion, a way to express my affection and care. Every ingredient was chosen with attention, every spice added with love, and every dish served with the hope of bringing joy and comfort. When Michael introduced Tiffany 5 years ago, she seemed the epitome of modernity and success, a rising marketing executive with an impeccable apartment in Manhattan and a taste for everything trendy. At first, I tried to connect with her through my cooking. I prepared my most beloved dishes, hoping that the taste of tradition and affection would win her over. But Tiffany had a different palate, one that seemed to disdain Caucasian homemade in favor of Caucasian gourmet, Caucasian exotic, Caucasian minimalist. Her compliments were always accompanied by a hot, but a suggestion of how the dish could be improved or modernized. Michael, always loyal, tried to mediate, openly praising my food, but I felt the growing tension. Tiffany saw my cooking as an antiquated hobby, not an art. She saw me as an old-fashioned woman, stuck in traditions that, in her view, had no place in the modern world, and on that Thanksgiving Day she decided to make that clear to everyone. The mockery of my pumpkin pie was not an isolated incident. It was the culmination of years of subtle disdain, a public declaration that my worth, my passion, were insignificant in her world. The tension in Tiffany's house in Greenwich, Connecticut, was almost palpable even before dinner was served. She had insisted on hosting Thanksgiving this year, claiming her now modern, well-equipped kitchen was more suitable for the occasion. I, as always, offered to bring my famous pumpkin pie, a classic that everyone in Michael's family adored. Tiffany accepted with a forced smile, but her eyes already showed silent judgment. As guests arrived, Tiffany's friends from work, some distant relatives of hers, and Michael's immediate family, I felt the atmosphere shift. Tiffany, with her melodious yet cutting voice, began to describe each dish she had prepared, using culinary terms I barely understood. This is a sous vide turkey with cranberry and rosemary reduction, a technique that ensures perfect succulence," she explained, as guests nodded impressed. When it was time for my pie, she paused dramatically. "And here we have Eleanor's pumpkin pie," she announced, picking up the pie with her fingertips as if it were a dusty relic. "It's traditional, a classic, I'd say, a little rustic perhaps, but it certainly brings a touch of nostalgia for those who appreciate old-fashioned flavors." A muffled laugh rippled through the table. "And I tried to modernize it, but Eleanor insists on her grandma's recipes. Not much you can do, is there?" She gave me a look that said, "Ray, you're old-fashioned and irrelevant." I felt my face burn. The words were a direct blow, not just to my cooking, but to my essence. Michael tried to intervene. Mom, your pie is the best." But Tiffany cut him off with a smile. "Of course, darling, for those who like the basics." Oh, the shame was unbearable. I felt useless, my heart aching from her cruel words. That feast, which should have been a celebration, became a festival of humiliation, and I was the main course. That night, back in my small apartment in Boston, the silence was deafening. Every laugh, every whisper, every glance from Tiffany replayed in my mind. I felt like a broken porcelain vase, shattered into 1,000 pieces. The kitchen, which had always been my refuge, now seemed like a battlefield where I had been defeated. But as I wiped away tears and put away the remains of my humiliated pie, my fingers touched something forgotten at the bottom of an old drawer, a worn recipe book with a faded cover and yellowed pages. It was my Grandma Rose's notebook. Grandma Rose was a woman of grit, an immigrant who arrived in the United States with nothing but her courage and her recipes. She taught me that food was not just sustenance, but a form of art, of history, of resistance. Flipping through the pages, I felt a wave of nostalgia and, more importantly, a spark of something I had lost, dignity. In the midst of notes about breads and preserves, I found a page with more elaborate handwriting, almost a whispered secret. The Vance family recipe for the truth cake. I had never heard of it. Grandma was always mysterious about some of her creations. But it wasn't just a cake recipe. There was a peculiar note, the ingredient that, when added, would rewrite her entire legacy. My heart pounded. It wasn't a common culinary ingredient, but something deeper, something that Grandma Rose, in her wisdom, had hidden. It was a metaphor, a key to unlocking not just a flavor, but a truth. In that moment, the pain of humiliation began to transform into a cold determination. Tiffany had underestimated me, but she didn't know the strength that ran in my veins, the strength of Grandma Rose's legacy. In the days that followed, Grandma Rose's notebook became my constant companion. I studied it with the devotion of a scholar unraveling an ancient text. The truth caking recipe was complex, requiring precision and patience. It wasn't just about mixing flour and sugar. It was a process that seemed to demand a connection to the soul of cooking, an alchemy of ingredients and intentions. Every step was a ritual, every measurement a meditation. As I worked on the recipe, I began to understand the true meat ingredients Grandma had mentioned. It wasn't something you could buy in a supermarket. It was truth. The truth about who I was, about the value of my work, about my family's history. Grandma Rose, with her ancestral wisdom, knew that the greatest revenge was not retaliation, but revelation. That cake would not just be a dessert, it would be a mirror, reflecting the essence of whoever tasted it. My hands, which had trembled with shame at Tiffany's house, now worked with renewed precision, driven by a clear purpose. With every egg I cracked, every pinch of spice, I felt my confidence return. The kitchen, once a place of defeat, transformed into my laboratory of redemption. I wasn't just baking a cake, I was weaving a narrative, one that would begin with sweetness and end with an unforgettable revelation. The anticipation of the moment Tiffany would taste the Tamonan truth caken gave me a strength I hadn't felt in years. With the Mewan truth caken perfectly baked and exuding an aroma that filled my apartment, it was time to plan the next step. I didn't want a public confrontation. I wanted a subtle yet undeniable revelation. Tiffany, in her arrogance, would never expect to be challenged on her own turf. I needed an opportunity, an event where she would be present, and where the presentation of my cake would be not only accepted, but expected. The perfect opportunity arose in the form of Michael's birthday dinner. Tiffany, always the perfect hostess, was organizing an intimate party for close family. She called me, with her sweet, superficial voice, inviting me and, almost as an afterthought, asking if I could bring something for dessert, perhaps one of your classics for a change. It was the cue I needed. "Of course, dear," I replied, my voice calm and controlled, without a trace of the pain she had inflicted. "I have a new recipe that I think you'll like. It's a family cake, an old recipe from Grandma Rose. I'm sure it will be a surprise for everyone." Tiffany laughed, a light, disdainful laugh. "Oh, Eleanor, you and your grandma's recipes. I'm sure it will be interesting." She had no idea what was coming. I wasn't just bringing a cake. I was bringing the truth, wrapped in sugar and spices, ready to be revealed. The silent culinary revenge was about to be served. Tiffany's house in Greenwich, Connecticut, was impeccable, as always. The scent of pine and cinnamon hung in the air, mixing with the smell of sophisticated food. Michael, my son, greeted me with a tight hug, his eyes expressing a mixture of affection and a slight apprehension. Tiffany, for her part, was radiant in her silk dress, greeting guests with the ease of a perfect hostess. She gave me a condescending smile when she saw the box I was carrying. "Ah, Grandma's pie, isn't it, Eleanor? I'm sure it will be an interesting addition to our dessert table." Her voice, though polished, carried that tone of superiority I knew so well. Dinner proceeded with the usual elegance. Tiffany dominated the conversation, discussing her recent trips to Tuscany and the wines she had selected for the evening. Michael, though visibly happy about his birthday, seemed a little sidelined, as if the grandeur of the occasion overshadowed him. I, on the other hand, remained silent, observing, waiting for the right moment. The truth caken rested discreetly in the kitchen, awaiting its triumphant entry. When it was time for dessert, Tiffany, with a dramatic flourish, announced, "And now, to conclude our evening, we have a selection of fine sweets, including a lavender creme brulee, and of course, Eleanor's contribution, a family recipe she insists on keeping alive." She gave me a playful look, as if she were giving me a chance to redeem myself with something quelque simple. I stood up, and with a serene smile brought out the cake. It was simple in appearance, a layered cake with white frosting, but it exuded a complex and inviting aroma that immediately captured everyone's attention. "This is Grandma Rose's truth cake," I announced, my voice clear and firm. "It's an old recipe, and the secret ingredient, as Grandma used to say, rewrites the legacy of whoever tastes it." A murmur of curiosity rippled through the table. Tiffany, always the first to taste, took a generous slice. She brought the fork to her mouth with an air of someone expecting something old-fashioned, but her eyes widened. The taste was indescribable, an explosion of sweetness and spices, but with an underlying note that seemed familiar. Not familiar in the sense of something she had tasted before, but familiar in the sense of something she was. Her smile wavered. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. The Mayan's secret ingredients was beginning to work, and her legacy, built on a facade of perfection and superiority, was about to be rewritten. The dining room, once filled with lively conversation, was now enveloped in a tense silence, broken only by the occasional clinking of a fork on a plate. Tiffany, who moments before radiated confidence, seemed to shrink in her chair. Her eyes, once bright and self-assured, now showed a glint of panic. The truth-caken was doing its job. It wasn't a poison nor a magic potion, but a combination of flavors and textures so authentic and deeply rooted in tradition that it seemed to strip away the superficiality of whoever tasted it, revealing their rawest essence. For Tiffany, who lived by appearances, it was an unforgiving mirror. "This cake is interesting," she stammered, trying to regain her composure. "But what is this flavor? It's so familiar, but I can't quite place it." Her voice was louder than necessary, a sign of her growing nervousness. One of the guests, a colleague of Tiffany's, a man who always praised her sophistication, cleared his throat. "Tiffany, I don't know what it is, but this cake reminds me of my grandmother. She used to make an apple cake with such an authentic flavor, not like the sweets you usually serve." The seemingly innocent observation hit Tiffany like a lightning bolt. She had spent years distancing herself from her own roots, from her humble origins in a small rural town, to build an image of a cosmopolitan and refined woman. The cake, with its rustic honesty, was unearthing that truth. Michael, who had been observing everything with an expression of growing confusion, finally spoke up. "Mom, what is this cake? It's delicious, but it's different from anything I've ever tasted." I smiled, a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "It's Grandma Rose's recipe, Michael. She used to say the secret ingredient was memory. Every bite brings forth the truths we try to hide, the origins we deny." Tiffany paled. "This is ridiculous, Eleanor. It's just a cake," she exclaimed, her voice now bordering on hysteria. You're trying to embarrass me." I looked at her, my voice calm and controlled, but imbued with an authority she had never seen in me. "No, Tiffany, I'm not trying to embarrass you. The cake is merely revealing who you truly are. You mocked my food, my tradition, my essence. You made me feel useless, but the truth is, the uselessness isn't in my pumpkin pie, but in your inability to value what is genuine, what is real." The words echoed in the room. Michael, finally understanding the depth of the situation, looked at Tiffany with a mixture of shock and disappointment. "Tiffany, what is Mom saying?" he asked, his voice low and serious. She tried to defend herself, but the words wouldn't come out. The facade of perfection she had meticulously built for years crumbled before everyone's eyes. The Nan-Truth-Caken had rewritten her legacy, not with lies, but with the brutal honesty of her own essence. The silent culinary revenge had been served, and its taste was bitter for those who partook of it with a closed heart. The night of Michael's birthday ended in awkward silence. Tiffany, unable to bear the weight of the revelation, retreated to the bedroom, leaving the guests in a state of shock and reflection. Michael came to me, his eyes filled with deep sadness. "Mom, I didn't know she felt that way, that she was like that." I hugged him, feeling my son's pain, but also the certainty that the truth, however painful, was necessary. "She didn't feel that way, Michael," I said softly. "She is that way, and now you know it too." In the days that followed, the truth of the Nan-Truth-Caken reverberated. Tiffany and Michael had difficult conversations, and the image of perfection she projected fell apart. There was no immediate divorce, but the dynamic of their relationship changed irrevocably. Michael, who had always defended me but passively, now saw me with new eyes, with a respect and admiration that went beyond filial love. He began to value traditions, authenticity, and to recognize the subtle manipulation Tiffany exercised. As for me, the humiliation of Thanksgiving became a catalyst. Then Truth-Caken not only rewrote Tiffany's legacy, but mine as well. I was no longer the useless, old-fashioned woman she tried to make me believe I was. I was Eleanor Vance, the guardian of a legacy of authenticity, love, and flavors that transcended time. I decided it was time to share this truth with the world. With Michael's support, who helped me create a website and social media accounts, I began selling my cakes and pies, not just Fretch's Grandma's Pier and the Mawa's Truth Cake, but all the recipes I had perfected over the years. To my surprise, demand exploded. People didn't just want sweets. They wanted the story behind them, the authenticity, the taste of truth. My small kitchen in Boston, once a place of solitude, now buzzed with life. I felt useful again, not for external validation, but for an inner purpose. Grandma Rose's Fapper's secret ingredients wasn't just a metaphor, it was the courage to be who you truly are, to value your roots, and not to let others' superficiality define your worth. My pain transformed into a silent culinary revenge, yes, but also into a new legacy. The legacy of authenticity and resilience. And you, have you ever tasted the bitter flavor of humiliation or the sweetness of truth? Share your story in the comments, hit like if this narrative touched your heart, and subscribe to the channel for more stories where authenticity always wins.